Welcome to a deep dive, everyone,
Yeah.
into this whole world of work-life integration.
Yeah.
This isn't about, those quick fixes or like those little life hacks we see everywhere.
Yeah.
It's more about, like stepping back and looking at the bigger picture of how we
Exactly.
try to balance,
Yeah.
work and life.
Yeah.
And we're going to look at everything from company policies to the choices we make every day to even these like global trends that are kind of shaping how we work and live.
Yeah. And we've got a really fascinating mix of sources for this one.
Oh, yeah.
We've got academic research, some real-world examples, and even a peek into what happens when, high-powered professionals decide to become parents.
Okay.
You'll be surprised how interconnected it all is.
Okay, I'm interested already.
Did you know that technology, despite all the promises of making us, more efficient,
Right.
might actually make us feel busier?
Okay.
Or that for some professionals, work can actually be less emotionally challenging than their home life. We'll also explore how things like diversity policies, globalization, and even, unfortunately, things like workplace shootings all tie back to this idea of work-life balance.
I'm intrigued. So to start, it seems like that traditional 9 to 5 work day that, so many of us grew up with,
Yeah.
it's kind of disappearing for a lot of people.
Yeah.
We hear a lot about, the death of the 9 to 5,
Mhm.
but what are the real implications of that?
Well, it's not just about flexibility, right? It's a fundamental shift in how we structure work altogether.
Okay.
And one of the most surprising findings is that technology,
Yeah.
Despite all those promises of making us more efficient, hasn't actually reduced our work hour.
Really?
Yeah.
I always just kind of assumed that technology would help us, work less.
It seems logical, right?
Yeah.
But the research suggests otherwise.
Yeah.
Like the Bureau of Labor Statistics found that a significant percentage of managers,
Uh-huh.
particularly men, are working 49 hours or more per week.
Wow.
And that number's only going up. It's almost as if technology has created this expectation that we have to be constantly available and responsive.
That makes sense. We're always connected.
Mm.
Always checking emails, always on our phones, checking messages.
Right.
So even when we're not technically working, it can still feel like we are because it's always there in the back of our minds.
Exactly. This constant connectivity kind of blurs those boundaries between work and life,
Yeah.
making it difficult to truly disconnect and recharge.
Right.
And it's not just managers who are feeling this pressure.
Wow.
This always-on culture can impact everyone in the organization,
Uh-huh.
creating a sense of urgency and busyness that can be incredibly draining.
It really can. And it also makes me wonder, are we actually more productive with all this extra time that we're putting in? Or are we just spreading ourselves thinner?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it's one that researchers are still kind of grappling with.
Yep.
There's a growing concern that all this busyness might be more about perception than actual output.
Yeah.
We might be working longer hours. Right.
But are we actually achieving more? Or are we just creating this illusion of productivity?
I think a lot of people can relate to that feeling of being busy, but not necessarily productive.
Yeah.
And it seems like this constant connection to work makes it even harder to manage, everything else in our lives, especially family responsibilities.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Think about all of the emotional labor that's involved in raising children, caring for aging parents, or simply maintaining a household.
Right.
It's often invisible and undervalued, but incredibly demanding.
Absolutely.
Sociologist Arlie Hochschild even argues that for some people, work might actually feel less emotionally demanding than home life.
That's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah.
So you're saying that some people might actually find refuge in work because it feels less emotionally taxing than dealing with the demands of their personal lives.
It might sound a little counterintuitive,
Yeah.
but it highlights just how complex this whole reality of work-life integration is.
We can't just assume that work is always the source of stress and that home is always this haven of peace and tranquility.
Right.
For some people, it might be the complete opposite.
Right.
And this just further complicates our understanding of, what it really means to achieve balance.
So it's not just about time management. It's about the emotional and psychological demands of both work and life.
Exactly. And speaking of managing demands, many companies try to help by implementing these so-called family-friendly policies.
Uh-huh.
But are these programs really as effective as they claim to be?
Okay, let's dive into that.
Yeah.
On the surface, things like flex time reduced hours or working from home sound great.
Right.
Who wouldn't want more control over their schedule to handle, doctor's appointments or school events?
You're right. The idea is definitely appealing.
Yeah.
And there can be some real benefits.
Yeah.
Reduce stress, improve morale, and even better employee retention.
Huh.
But research suggests that simply having these policies in place isn't actually enough. There are often some hidden downsides that both individuals and organizations really need to be aware of.
I'm curious about these downsides. It seems like having those options for flexibility would always be a good thing.
Yeah.
What am I missing?
We'll take flex time, for example.
Right.
While it does offer greater schedule control, it can also create some coordination challenges for teams and managers.
Right.
It can also lead to feelings of isolation for employees who aren't physically present in the office as often.
So even though the intention is good, there can be these unintended consequences that make things more complicated.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And another issue is that the effectiveness of these programs really depends heavily on the company culture and how they're actually implemented.
I can see how that would make a huge difference.
Yeah.
A company could have the most generous parental leave policy in the world.
Right.
But if taking leave is seen as a sign of weakness or a lack of commitment, no one's actually going to use it.
Precisely, it's not just about the policies themselves, it's about the underlying values and attitudes that shape how those policies are perceived and actually utilized. A truly family-friendly company goes beyond just the policies and creates a culture where employees feel genuinely supported and valued regardless of their family situation.
This makes me think about the whole idea of work-life conflict.
Yeah.
Not just about, being short on time, right?
Right.
It seems like there's this deeper psychological component at play.
You're absolutely right. Work-life conflict is deeply personal and subjective.
Okay.
It's not just about the objective demands of work and life, but about how we perceive those demands and how they affect us emotionally and psychologically.
So two people could have the exact same workload and family responsibilities, but experience very different levels of conflict.
Precisely.
Wow.
And that's where individual differences come into play.
Okay.
Our personalities, our coping mechanisms, our values, all of these factors influence how we experience and manage work-life conflict.
This is where it gets really interesting for me. Tell me more about how our personalities kind of influence this whole balancing act.
Well, let's consider traits like self-esteem,
Okay.
self-efficacy, and locus of control. Research suggests that people with high self-esteem and a strong internal locus of control tend to cope better with work-life conflict.
Okay.
They feel more in control of their situations
Right.
and are more likely to believe that they can find solutions.
That makes sense. If you believe you can make a difference, you're more likely to take action and advocate for yourself rather than just feeling overwhelmed and helpless.
Exactly. On the other hand, someone with lower self-esteem might be more prone to feeling powerless in the face of conflict. They might be less likely to speak up about their needs or to seek support, which can really perpetuate that cycle of stress and imbalance.
It's fascinating how much our individual personality traits can affect our experience of work-life integration.
Yeah.
It's not just about these external factors. It's also about how we internally process and respond to those factors.
It's about recognizing that we all have different strengths and weaknesses, and that those differences play a significant role in how we navigate, the complexities of work and life.
And this leads to another crucial aspect, decision-making.
Yes.
We're constantly making choices between work and life,
Right.
trying to figure out how to prioritize those competing demands.
You're right. It's like this constant juggling act.
Yeah.
And decision process theory offers a fascinating lens for understanding how we actually make those choices.
Okay.
It suggests that individuals, are continually weighing the costs and benefits of different options,
Right.
both in the work domain and the family domain.
So it's almost like we're running this mental cost-benefit analysis for every decision, trying to figure out like the optimal outcome for both the work and our personal lives.
Exactly.
But it's rarely a simple equation, is it?
Definitely not. There are often emotional factors, social pressures, and unforeseen circumstances that really complicate the decision-making process.
Right.
One study highlighted a couple facing a career-changing move to Mexico.
Okay.
They had to consider not just the financial impact, but also the impact on their relationship, their child's education, and their overall well-being.
This sounds like a classic dilemma, a potentially amazing opportunity, but with some significant personal costs attached to it.
Yeah.
How did they navigate that decision? Did the research provide any insights into their thought process?
It highlighted just how complex these decisions really are.
Okay.
There's this constant back and forth, a negotiation between what we want and what's actually feasible, both at work and at home.
Right.
Ultimately, there's no right or wrong answer.
Yeah.
It's about making the best decision we can with the information we have at the time and being prepared to adapt as circumstances change.
And this decision-making process can be incredibly complex, especially when we consider the influence of our partners, our families, and even societal expectations.
You're right. It's a constant balancing act, and there's no one-size-fits-all solution. But by understanding the factors at play, we can hopefully make more informed and fulfilling choices for ourselves and our families.
So it's about being self-aware, understanding our own needs and priorities, and being willing to advocate for ourselves in both our personal and professional lives. And speaking of advocacy, I think it's time to talk about the power of speaking up in the workplace.
Yes.
It's not just about making individual choices. It's about having these open and honest conversations to create a more supportive environment for everyone.
Absolutely. Speaking up can be difficult.
Oh, yeah.
Especially if you fear negative consequences.
Right.
But it's absolutely essential for driving positive change. And a key factor in creating a space where people feel comfortable speaking up is leadership.
That makes sense. A supportive leader can make all the difference in whether employees feel empowered to express their needs and concerns. What are some of the characteristics of a leader who truly fosters this kind of open communication?
Supportive leaders create a safe space for dialogue, where employees feel comfortable expressing their concerns without fear of retribution.
Right.
They actively solicit feedback. They listen attentively to their employees, and they take concrete steps to address those concerns.
Okay.
On the other hand, authoritarian leaders stifle communication. They discourage dissent and create a culture of fear where people are hesitant to speak up.
So it's not just about having an open door policy. It's about creating a culture where open communication is valued and rewarded.
Exactly. Think about it this way. Supportive leaders encourage a culture of open communication, while authoritarian leaders stifle it.
And that can make all the difference in whether employees feel empowered to speak up about their work-life needs. But it's not just about the leader, right?
Yeah.
There's also the organizational culture to consider.
You're absolutely right. What are the unspoken norms and assumptions about success and commitment in your workplace?
It's about the underlying values and beliefs that drive behavior.
Exactly.
Is it all about face time and putting in long hours? Or are results and well-being valued just as highly?
And how do those norms and assumptions affect different groups of people?
That's a great point. It brings us to a critical question. Are opportunities for work-life balance equally distributed in the workplace?
Unfortunately, no. We have to acknowledge the reality of something called organizational stratification.
Okay.
This means that even within the same company, access to things like flexible schedules, job security, and benefits can vary dramatically depending on job level.
So it's like there's this hierarchy of privilege even within the same organization.
Exactly. And this often plays out in ways that disadvantage lower-level workers. For example, research on the retail and hospitality industries shows how unpredictable schedules and a lack of benefits disproportionately impact workers in those sectors.
It makes me think about my own workplace. Are certain roles offered more support than others? And if so, why? What are the implications for those who are left behind?
Those are really important questions to ask. And they highlight the need to move beyond simply tweaking policies and focus on those deeper cultural shifts in how organizations view success and value their employees.
So it's not just about offering a few more family-friendly perks. It's about challenging those deeply ingrained assumptions that often equate long hours and constant availability with dedication and competence.
Precisely. We need to dismantle that outdated separate spheres mentality.
Okay.
The idea that work and personal life should be neatly compartmentalized because it harms both individuals and the organizations in the long run.
It seems like this ties into a much broader perspective. How does globalization impact work-life balance for workers around the world?
That's where things get really complex. The rise of transnational corporations has created both opportunities and challenges when it comes to work-life integration.
On the one hand, it could potentially, spread good practices and raise standards globally. But on the other hand, it could also lead to the exploitation of workers in developing countries or the erosion of local labor protections.
That's the tension.
Yeah.
And the research offers this really compelling example from a U.S. multinational operating in India.
Right.
The clash of cultural norms around work and family created some significant challenges in applying policies across borders.
It highlights the need for a nuanced approach to globalization.
Yeah.
one that takes into account local contexts and cultural differences while still advocating for fair and ethical treatment of workers worldwide.
Absolutely.
And that raises, I think, a fundamental question in an increasingly interconnected world. How can we ensure that work-life balance isn't just a privilege for the few, but a right for all?
That is the question.
And that's a question that we'll continue to explore as we delve deeper into this topic. We were just talking about ensuring work-life balance is a right for all, not just a privilege for a select few. And it struck me that globalization plays a huge role in that.
Oh, it absolutely does. As more companies operate across borders, the impact on workers' lives and their ability to integrate work and life, it becomes incredibly complex.
I imagine there's a lot of tension between, say, a company's desire for profits and the well-being of its employees, especially when those employees are in different countries with, varying labor laws.
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head. Take transnational corporations.
Okay.
Or TNCs.
Yeah.
Their influence can be huge. On the one hand, they could be this force for positive change, bringing better work-life policies to countries where those might not exist.
It's like setting a higher standard that then becomes the norm.
Exactly.
Okay.
But the reality is TNCs are often under intense pressure to cut costs. And boost profits.
Yeah.
That pressure can kind of trickle down even across borders sometimes, leading to situations where worker well-being takes a back seat.
It's almost like a race to the bottom. Whichever country has the fewest worker protections wins the business. Yeah. That doesn't sound good for anyone in the long run.
It's a real concern.
Yeah.
And this is where ethical considerations become so essential. We can't just assume that globalization will automatically improve work-life balance everywhere.
Right.
It takes conscious effort from these companies and a real commitment to fair labor practices no matter way they operate.
So it sounds like we need more than just individual companies trying to do better.
Right.
We need international cooperation, maybe even global regulations to protect workers' rights in this increasingly interconnected world.
That's a crucial piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
It's not just about one company's policy. It's about a systemic shift in how we approach work on a global scale.
Okay.
But zooming back in a bit.
Okay.
What can individual companies do to create a more supportive environment, even within their own structures?
We touched on this earlier, but it seems like it goes beyond just having policies, written down somewhere.
Right.
You mentioned company culture being a big factor.
Culture is absolutely key. It's about fostering an environment where work-life balance isn't just allowed, it's genuinely valued as part of what makes both individuals and the organization successful.
So it's a deeper level than just, offering a few perks or saying the right things. What are some concrete ways that companies can show that commitment?
Leadership sets the tone.
Okay.
When leaders model healthy work-life boundaries themselves, it sends a strong signal.
Okay.
Prioritizing employee well-being,
right,
having open communication, those actions speak louder than words.
It's walking the walk, not just talking the talk, right?
Exactly.
But what about those unspoken assumptions that exist in so many workplaces?
Right.
The things that maybe nobody even realizes are influencing behavior.
Those are often the hardest to address, but also the most important.
Right.
Things like the expectation that you're always connected,
right,
always available, that taking time off is somehow a sign of weakness.
Those are deeply ingrained in our work culture.
Okay.
How do you even begin to change those kinds of attitudes?
It takes conscious effort and a willingness to challenge that status quo. Leaders can set clear expectations about work hours, encourage people to actually use their vacation time, and reward results rather than just how many hours someone's physically in the office.
It sounds like a shift from work comes first to people come first.
Exactly. It's about respecting employees as whole people with lives outside of work and trusting them to manage their time effectively.
Okay.
This ultimately benefits everyone because when people feel supported and respected, they're more likely to be engaged and productive.
So it's a win-win situation.
Right.
But it requires a pretty big shift in perspective, a willingness to rethink some of those long-held assumptions about what success even means, both for individuals and for companies.
You've hit on a crucial point. If we only measure success by profits and productivity, we're missing a huge part of the picture. Well-being, happiness, fulfillment, those are essential too.
Right.
And they're often directly linked to how well people can integrate work and life.
This is making me think about my own definition of success. It's easy to get caught up in that, always striving mentality.
Yeah.
Without stopping to ask if it's actually leading to a life that feels good.
And that's where the power of speaking up, which we talked about earlier, becomes so important.
Right.
It's not just about advocating for your own needs. It's about contributing to this larger conversation about how we can create a work culture that's more humane and sustainable for everyone.
It's realizing that we're not alone in these struggles, and that by talking openly and honestly, we can start to create real change. We mentioned work-life balance, but is that even the right way to think about it?
Balance implies this static state.
Yeah.
Like you can perfectly divide your time and energy between work and life, and everything will just stay neatly in place.
Right.
But the reality is it's much more dynamic than that.
It's more like riding a wave, constantly adjusting to the ebb and flow of demands.
That's a great analogy. It's about being adaptable, being mindful of your own needs and priorities, but also being open to new possibilities and ways of working that might better suit your current circumstances.
And that means challenging those societal norms that try to put us in boxes, right?
Yes.
Like the idea that certain jobs are male or female, or that becoming a parent means you have to sacrifice your career ambitions.
Those limiting beliefs can really hold us back.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that we have the power to shape our own work-life journeys. And that there's no one right way to do it. We can create our own definitions of success and fulfillment.
And it's so much easier to do that when we have support from others who are navigating those similar challenges.
Yes.
It's about building a community of understanding and sharing our experiences, learning from each other's successes and failures.
That sense of community can be incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
And it extends beyond our immediate workplaces.
Right.
Policymakers, researchers, activists. Everyone has a role to play in creating a future of work that is truly equitable and supportive.
We've talked a lot about the problems, but this is making me feel more hopeful.
Good.
What if instead of just trying to squeeze our lives into existing work structures, we reimagine work itself to better support individuals, families, and communities? That idea of redesigning work itself is pretty radical, isn't it?
It is. It's a challenge to our assumptions, for sure.
Yeah.
But it's also incredibly exciting. To think about what's possible.
Yeah.
If we actually start with the well-being of people as the foundation,
Right.
rather than treating it as an afterthought.
So much of what we've talked about today has highlighted how work, as it's currently structured, often comes into conflict with our lives outside of work.
Right.
What if we could flip that script and design work in a way that actually enhances our lives?
Yeah.
Rather than detracting from them.
That's the dream, right? And it's not just about individual happiness. It's about, stronger families, healthier communities, and a more sustainable society overall.
I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together. It's not just about finding work-life balance.
Right.
It's about fundamentally rethinking the role of work in our lives and in our society.
It's a big picture perspective, for sure.
Yeah, it is.
But even small changes can make a difference.
Right.
Remember we talked about the power of speaking up?
Yes.
Each time we challenge an outdated norm, each time we advocate for our needs, we're planting a seed for a different kind of future.
It's almost like a ripple effect spreading outward from those individual actions to create a wave of change. And that brings me back to our listener.
Yeah.
What are some key takeaways they can walk away with from this deep dive?
Well, first and foremost, remember that work-life integration isn't about finding a perfect formula.
Right.
Or achieving some mythical state of balance.
Right.
It's an ongoing process, a journey of learning, adapting, and advocating for what matters most to you.
It's about being self-aware, knowing your own values and priorities.
Yes.
And having the courage to make choices that align with those, even if they go against the grain of what society or your workplace expects.
And it's about recognizing that you're not alone in this.
Yeah.
Connect with others, share your experiences, and support each other in navigating, the complexities of work and life.
Right.
There's strength in numbers.
Absolutely.
And together we can create a more humane and sustainable future of work for everyone.
This has been an incredibly insightful conversation.
It has.
I feel like I have a much deeper understanding of not just the challenges of work-life integration, but also the possibilities for creating a more fulfilling and balanced future.
I agree. It's been a pleasure exploring this with you.
Likewise.
And remember, knowledge is power.
Yes.
And the more we understand about the forces shaping work and life, the more empowered we are to make choices that align with our values and create a world where everyone can thrive.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring.